So the next section I want to talk about is application monitoring. So in application monitoring, this kind of breaks into two major categories. It breaks into what we call cloud and web, which is basically your web applications, and email monitoring. So both of these represent synthetic transactions we're sending against those systems in order to benchmark the performance. So in the case of a web application, that can be a single web check where we're just fetching down a page and measuring the page load time. And this is the full page load time. So this is going to grab the page. It's going to grab any linked images, any JavaScript that's on the page, execute the JavaScript, and try and give you an overall picture of what the total page load time it looks like for that particular system. Now, in the case of a multi-part check, that can also involve submitting a form, for example, to log into the page and then looking for follow-up pages. This one, for example, has 3 steps associated with it. And you can see how long each of the different steps takes as well as the overall transaction time. So in the event of a slowdown, you can quickly identify which step of the process suddenly started taking a lot longer than usual, and it gives you a place to begin your troubleshooting and kind of narrow that down, into what the source might be. But what's new in 9.1 is that these checks can also be launched both locally and remotely. So now, in the past, they always originated from the OmniCenter system. But now you can also launch remote web checks using a cloud infrastructure that we provide that allows you to execute those checks from various points around the country or around the world. And it's very simple to do. All I have to do is, as I'm adding a new web check, for example, I can go in here and just create a new web check. And within that web check, the first thing it's going to specify is if I want to associate a particular location to launch the check from. So if I want to launch that check from New York or from San Francisco or from Central Europe, I've got those options built in. And over time, we're going to be expanding the list of cloud locations to multiple different data centers around the world as well. So we'll be adding, Asia and probably Australia before long as well. Now, the related strategic groups and related NetFlow apps allow me to bundle more information into that synthetic check. So the idea is that if I've got a strategic group that I've already picked out that has just the servers that I need for that particular application in it, I can associate that particular group with this synthetic check. So when I go to the main page for that synthetic check, it'll show me any of the devices in that strategic group that are having a problem and highlight them for me. So I'll be able to kind of see that all in the same place. If there's thresholds going on those individual systems, it'll show me those as well. The application type, this is just how it's classified in that dashboard widget. So I can keep all my remote checks together, for example. And then NetFlow apps, same thing. If I've got a NetFlow app that's pre-configured that's already looking at exactly the flows for this particular application, to and from this particular app, I can associate that data with the application check. And when I look at the dashboard, it can break down, who's talking to my application and how much data are they moving, who's my top conversations to this particular application, to give me kind of more depth about what the application is involved with. So let's just create a test one here real quick. And I'm going to go into that test application. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add that custom web check. So this is how we actually script the check to run against that particular system. So I'm just going to start with a real simple one, and we're going to run this against, let's say, Google. Now what it's going to do is it's actually going to go fetch that web page down that I just pointed it at, and it's going to ask me if I want to complete a form on that page. So if there's a login form on that page, I can actually complete that this way, or I can actually time how long it takes to run a basic search if I want to across Google. In this case, I'm not going to fill the form out. I'm just going to match something on that page to validate that I got the correct one, like say the word Google, and then it's going to save that check. So now I've got a first step there. Now, if I wanted to, I could add more steps after that first one. Like if I wanted to say, fill out the form, and then once you've logged into the form on the resulting page, I need you to, look for a specific link that's only going to be there if you logged in correctly. So you can validate more of the application stack and make sure that it's actually working properly. I can also then go in and create alerts and thresholds based on this check. So if I want to go in here, for example, and then say, I want to create a performance related threshold, I can do that right here and set all of my regular performance or even anomaly thresholds based on that data, set who they're going to notify, as well as the statistical category. In the statistical category, this is just what column on the at a glance pages turns red when this particular threshold is exceeded. So if I've got an HTTP column on the page, it would show up there. If I don't have that column turned on, it would show up as an actual in the other column. But that's what that controls. And then you can also tell it how to re-notify. So if I want to, for example, say notify customer service when this goes down, and then notify every 60 minutes after that. And if it stays down for 2 hours, then I want to notify the executives as well. So you can build in that re-notification to the thresholds as well. And then the total web check time is measured in seconds here. So I can say, let's say 1 second is a warning and 3 seconds is a critical. That's probably pretty tight timing for this, but it'll give us an alarm pretty quickly probably. And then you can also go in and create an application check, which is for connectivity. So if I want to create a connectivity alert when the whole thing stops working or when the text verification fails, that's going to be created here as this check. So you can have separate steps for it. And the important thing about this is that the alert after is based in exceptions rather than minutes. So it's how many synthetic checks have to fail before I want to generate an alert for it. And so that's going to be basically 1, 2, or 3. You can kind of set a threshold for how sensitive you want it to be. Most of the time we recommend setting 2 here, so that in the event of a single failure, it doesn't immediately generate a notification. You kind of recheck it once and make sure it wasn't just a blip and that it recovered immediately before you actually force out a second notification or an actual hard notification out. Once I set those, now when I go back to the main set of that page, you'll see that this is now showing that I've got active threshold. Status is still pending because the check hasn't actually run yet. And if I hit test, it's going to execute that check in real time and then tell me whether or not it actually failed or succeeded. So if we are able to validate the text on that page that we told it to validate, for example. So then if we come back in a few minutes, that should start to populate on my applications dashboard here. You can see right now it's set into pending because there's no data for it. These checks run every 5 minutes. So in a few minutes, that should start to populate with some additional checks and data from that. Now, email works similarly, but what email is actually doing is it's logging into my mail server and transmitting mail and then fetching it back out from a mailbox. So it's basically measuring the full round trip time in and out of the system. Now, there's kind of 2 ways to use this. You can use this to monitor an internal mail system where you're sending, to your local mail server and fetching it from a local mailbox. But you can also use this to monitor your external mail from the internet. So you can make sure that you're getting connectivity to and from the internet for mail. And the way you would do that is by setting the send address up as, so let's add a custom email check here so you can see. So this is the information for sending the email. So I can point this at a particular mail server and give it a destination mail, which would be my mailbox that I'm retrieving it from. So let's call this omnitest@netrio.com. And it's going to be sent from, let's say, a Gmail address, omnitest@gmail.com. So then I'm going to give this, whatever my Gmail settings are, smtp.gmail.com. However I need to transmit that. What I'm going to do is this Gmail account is going to be set up to receive email and forward it on to an internal mailbox. So I can actually validate that from OmniCenter, I'm able to transmit mail all the way out to Gmail servers, and that Gmail is able to get that mail back into my internal servers, validating that kind of the full loop of in and out internet email is working correctly in my environment. And obviously, you'll have to provide it with the account username and password to log in, both from a send as well as a receive perspective. And you can either use POP3 or IMAP. Once you've done that, the synthetic check will start benchmarking and it will alert you in the event of a failure. So if I go in here, you can actually see I've got my application status checks here, and I've got my performance-related thresholds here. So I can set again, all the same parameters: who gets notified when it fails, how many failures in a row does it need before it'll actually send out the notification, and then what are the timers that I consider to be critical and who do I want to notify when that happens.